Unit 1, Language and Communication. Communication, Understanding Communicative Competence. Welcome to this comprehensive presentation on language and communication. We'll explore how language functions as a communication tool, examine communication theory, and delve into the concept of communicative competence with its various components. Throughout these slides, we'll move from theoretical foundations to practical applications, providing insights that bridge linguistics and educational practice. Our journey will take us through traditional approaches to language teaching and into modern communicative methodologies. Traditional versus modern language teaching. Traditional approach focus on teaching language items in isolation. Emphasize reading text with occasional oral practice. Prioritize learning about language rather than using it. Students gain knowledge but struggle with real communication. Communicative approach centers on solving communication problems in target language. Integrates all language skills into meaningful contexts. Emphasizes authentic language use for real purposes. Balances acquisition with learning for practical competence. Crashing's acquisition learning distinction. Learning is conscious process of studying language rules and structures. Formal knowledge about language, like grammar and vocabulary, traditional focus of language education. Whereas acquisition is subconscious process similar to first language development. Develops through meaningful interaction and natural communication, enables spontaneous language use in real contexts. Bridging the gap. Allwright proposed that focusing on communication problems would naturally take care of language learning. Modern approaches seek balance between explicit instruction and communicative practice. Defining language. Multiple perspectives. Sapir, 1921. Language is a purely human and non-instinctive method of communicating ideas, emotions, and desires by means of voluntarily produced symbols. Trager, 1949. A language system of arbitrary vocal symbols by means of which the members of a society interact in terms of their total culture. Hall, 1964. The institution whereby humans communicate and interact with each other by means of habitually used oral auditory arbitrary symbols. Hawke's design features of language. 1. Channel features. Auditory vocal channel. Sound travels between mouth and ear. Broadcast transmission and directional reception. Signals heard by anyone within range. Rapid fading. Sounds are transitory and disappear quickly. 2. Structural features. Discreteness. Uses distinct sound elements that clearly contrasts. Duality of patterning. Sounds combine to form meaningful elements. Arbitrariness. No inherent connection between words and their meanings. 3. Functional features. Semanticity. Elements convey stable meanings related to real-world situations. Displacement. Ability to discuss events remote in time or space. Productivity. Infinite capacity to create and understand new sentences. Additional design features of language. Interchangeability. Speakers can reproduce any linguistic message they understand, regardless of who originally produced it. Total feedback. Speakers can monitor their own linguistic output and make adjustments based on what they hear themselves saying. Specialization. Speech sounds serve no other function than to signal meaning, unlike animal calls that may serve multiple purposes. Traditional transmission. Language is passed from one generation to the next, primarily through teaching and learning. Functions of language beyond communication. Self-actualization, instrument of thought and creativity. Social functions, identity expression and relationship building. Basic functions, communication of ideas and emotions. While communication is often considered the primary function of language, it serves many other purposes. Language helps us process our thoughts, express our emotions, establish our identity, and create social bonds. The functions of language extend far beyond the simple transmission of information. Specific functions of language. Referential, communicating ideas and information about the world. Recording, preserving information and cultural knowledge. Performative, performing action through words, naming, baptizing. Expressive or emotional, releasing nervous energy and expressing feelings. Fatigue, maintaining social relationships and avoiding awkward silence. Aesthetic, enjoying the sonic qualities of language, rhythm, rhyme. Halliday's meta-functions of language. Ideational function, organizing experience of real or imaginary worlds, referring to persons, things, actions, events, states. Interpersonal function, establishing and maintaining social relationships, including forms to address, speech functions, modality. Textual function, creating coherent spoken or written text, ensuring language fits the situation of use. Halliday grouped the various language functions into these three meta-functions, which work together in any communication. The textual function breathes relevance into the ideational and interpersonal functions, creating a cohesive whole that serves both cognitive and social purposes. Communication through the ages. Communication theory, historical development. 1. Ancient Greece. Early scholarships began studying the exchange of meanings between individuals through symbols. 1928. Richards offered one of the first formal definitions of communication as mind influencing mind. 1960. Marshall McLuhan proposed the medium is the message, shifting focus to how media shapes communication. Late 20th century. Focus moved to mass communication, persuasion, interpersonal processes, and technology. Richard's definition of communication, 1928. Communication takes place when one mind so acts upon its environment that another mind is influenced, and in that other mind an experience occurs which is like the experience in the first mind and is caused in part by that experience. This early definition highlights several key aspects of communication that remain relevant today. The transfer of experience between minds, the role of environment in mediating this transfer, and the imperfect nature of the transmission. The experience is only like the original and caused in part by it. Richard's definition laid groundwork for later communication models by emphasizing the psychological dimension of communication rather than just the physical transmission of signals. Modern focus areas in communication. Communication studies. Mass communication industries. Study of media organization, production processes, and effects on social. Analysis of how information flows through large-scale channel. Persuasive communication. Examination of how technology influences attitudes and behaviors. Research on advertising, propaganda, and public relation techniques. Interpersonal communication. Investigation of how information is mediated between individuals. Study of verbal and non-verbal communication dynamics. Technology applications. Exploration of communication technology for social and educational purposes. Development of critical frameworks for evaluating modern communication forms. Laswell's core question in communication. Who, the source or sender of the message? Says what? The content of the message. To whom? The intended audience or receiver. With what effect? The impact or result of the communication. Harold D. Laswell's famous question encapsulates the fundamental elements of communication study. Most communication theories acknowledge that their primary task is to answer this query, though different disciplines may interpret each component differently based on their particular focus and methodology. Communication models, dynamics versus linear. Dynamic models focus on cognitive, emotional, and artistic aspects of communication. Consider socio-cultural contexts of communication. Emphasize different modes, narrative, pictorial, dramatic. Recognize that medium influences message content. Less quantitative, more qualitative in approach. Linear models describe communication as a sequential process. Focus on transmission of signals from source to destination. More mechanistic and quantitative in approach. Originated in electronic communication systems, Shannon and Weaver's model is the most influential example. Shannon and Weaver's mathematical model. Information source. Selects message from possible set. Transmitter. Converts message into signal. Channel. Medium for signal transmission. Receiver. Converts signal back to message. Destination. Persons for whom message is intended. This influential model was originally designed for electronic communication, but has been adapted for human communication. Its simplicity and clarity made it attractive to scholars across disciplines, though it has been expanded to account for the complexities of human interaction. Expanding linear communication model. The original 5-element model was expanded to provide greater applicability to various types of communication. This expanded version separates the information source into source and encoder, and the receiver into decoder and destination, allowing for more detailed analysis of the communication process. 1. Source, origin of the communication intention. 2. Encoder, transforms intention into symbolic form. 3. Message, the content being communicated. 4. Channel, the medium through which the message travels. 5. Decoder, interprets symbols back into meaning. 6. Receiver, final destination of the message. Entropy and redundancy in communication. Entropy, noise or interference that diminishes message integrity. Can be physical, background noise, psychological, preconceptions, or semantic, misunderstanding. Increases uncertainty and reduces predictability. Makes communication less efficient and effective. Negative entropy, ability to receive intact messages despite distortion. Receiver feels in missing details based on context. Recognizes intent despite incomplete information. Relies on shared knowledge and experience. Redundancy, repetition of elements within a message. Primary antidote to entropy in communication. Essential for effective human interaction. Present in most human activities and language. Winner's contribution, feedback, message sent. Speaker formulates and delivers communication. Message adjusted. Speaker modifies communication based on feedback. Message received. Listener processes and interprets the message. Feedback generated. Listener provides verbal or non-verbal response. Norbert Wiener, the father of cybernetics, added the crucial principle of feedback to the communication model. This corrected the static nature of Shannon and Weaver's original model by recognizing that sources respond to their own behavior and the context of the communication. Feedback makes the model dynamic and interactive. Practical example of communication model. Information source. A person speaking on the phone formulates a message they wish to convey. Transmitter, the telephone mouthpiece, converts sound waves into electrical signals. Channel, the electrical wires or wireless network, carries the signal from sender to receiver. Receiver, the telephone receiver or earpiece, converts electrical signals back into sound waves. Destination, the person listening to on the other side, on the other end, interprets the sounds as meaningful message. In face-to-face communication, the roles become more condensed. The speaker serves as both information source and transmitter, while the listener functions as both receiver and destination. The channel becomes the air through which sound waves travel. Speech acts, performative versus consultative. Performative utterances. Utterances that perform an act. To say is to do. Explicit performatives. Contain performative verbs, like promising or warning. I promise to be there. I warn you not to go. Implicit performatives. No performative verb. There's a vicious door behind you. Warning. I'll be there at 8. Promising. Consultative utterances. Utterances that assert something true or false. The sky is blue. Can be verified as true or false. Paris is the capital of France. Factual statement. The meeting started at noon. Reportive. Water boils at 100 Celsius degrees. Descriptive. 3 dimensions of speech acts. Perlocutionary acts. The effect produced by saying something. Illocutionary acts. The function performed in saying something. Locutionary act. The basic act of saying something meaningful. Using the example, shoot the snake, the locutionary act is simply saying these words in a way that can be understood. The illocutionary act might be giving an order or offering advice. The perlocutionary act would be the listener actually shooting the snake as a result of hearing the utterance. This three-part distinction helps us understand how language works, going beyond just conveying information. It shows how we use words to perform actions and influence others. Searle's classification of illocutionary acts: representatives, directives, commissives, expressives, declarations. Representatives. Speaker commits to truth of proposition. Example, affirm, believe, conclude, deny, report. Directives. Speaker tries to get the hearer to do something. Ask, challenge, command, insist, request. Commissives. Speaker commit to future course of action. Warranty, pledge, promise, swear, vow. Expressives. Speaker expresses attitude about state of affairs. Apologize, congratulate, thank, welcome. Declarations. Speaker alters external status or condition by utterance. I resign, I'll baptize you, you're fired. Felicity condition of speech acts. Preparatory conditions. Execution conditions. Sincerity conditions. Recognition conditions. When these conditions aren't met, speech acts lose their intended illocutionary force. For example, if someone without authority says, I pronounce you husband and wife, the marriage doesn't take place despite the words being spoken. Preparatory conditions. Speaker must have appropriate authority. For example, only a priest can baptize. Only a judge can sentence. Recognition conditions. Hearer must recognize speaker's intention. Example, understanding that it's cold might be a request to close a window. Execution conditions. Speech act must be performed correctly. Example, welcoming requires pleasant demeanor. Sincerity conditions. Speaker must be sincere in performing the acts. For example, promising requires intention to fulfill. Context. Essential for understanding speech acts. Linguistic context. The parts of a text that precedes and follows a word or passage. Helps determine the meaning of ambiguous words or phrases. Includes code text, the surrounding language that gives meaning. Example, bank means different things in riverbank versus bank account. Context of situation. The conditions and circumstances relevant to an event. Includes physical settings, participants, purpose, cultural norms, essential for interpreting the intended meaning of utterances. For example, it's hot in here could be a complaint or a request to open a window. Types of reference in communication. Anaphora, reference to something mentioned earlier in the text. Example, John arrived late. He missed the bus. He is an anaphora. Cataphora, reference to something mentioned later in the text. Example, before she arrived, Mary called to say she'd be late. She is a cataphora for Mary. Exophora, reference to something outside the text in the real world. For example, look at that, pointing to something. Anaphora and cataphora are types of endophora, meaning they refer to elements within the text itself. Exophora refers to elements in the context of situation. All these reference types are crucial for creating cohesive communication and require shared understanding between participants. Context of situation, Himes versus Halliday. Himes 8 components. 1. Form and content of text. 2. Setting, time and place. 3. Participants, speakers and audience. 4. Ends, intent and effect. 5. Key, tone, manner, spirit. 6. Medium, channel and form. 7. Genre, type of speech acts. 8. Interactional norms, social rules. Halliday's 3 headings. 1. Field, total event, purpose, subject matter. 2. Mode, function of text, channel, genre. 3. Tenor, participants and their relationships. Halliday's more abstract framework effectively subsumes Himes' detailed components, providing a broader analytical structure for understanding context. Halliday's context of situation, field, mode, and tenor. Field, the total event in which the situation functions includes the purpose and subject matter, what is happening and what is being talked about. Mode, the function of text in the event, includes channel, spoken, written, and genre, how language is being used in the interaction. Tenor, the participants and their relationships, includes status, roles, and social distance, who is taking part, and how they relate to each other. These 3 elements collectively define the context of situation for any text. They determine the kinds of meaning that are expressed and help explain why certain language choices are made in particular situations. English lessons example, context analysis. Content element, field, tenor, and mode. English lesson analysis. Field, language study, colors, teachers imparting knowledge, students acquiring it. Tenor, participants, teachers and pupils, fixed role relationships defined by educational institutions. Teacher is higher role even when participating alongside students. Mode, instruction and discussion language, both spoken and written channels. These analyses show how field, mode, and tenor work together to define the context of situation in a classroom setting. The language choices made by both teacher and students will be influenced by these contextual factors, creating a particular type of discourse appropriate to the educational environment. Chomsky competence versus performance. Linguistic competence, subconscious knowledge of language rules. Ideal speaker-hearer intrinsic knowledge. Ability to recognize grammatical sentences. Capacity to produce and understand new utterances. Independent of actual language use. Linguistic performance, actual use of language in concrete situations. Affected by memory limitations, distractions, errors. May include ungrammatical or incomplete utterances. Observable behavior rather than internal knowledge. Secondary to competence in Chomsky's view. Chomsky argued that linguistic competence should be the primary object of study for linguistics and linguists, at least initially. He saw performance as important, but believed understanding the form and structure of language competence was a necessary first step before analyzing its use, performance. Bridging the gap, grammar versus communication. Limitations of Chomsky's competence model. Excludes social interaction. Focuses solely on grammatical knowledge without considering how language is used in social contexts. Ignores rules of use. doesn't account for knowledge of when, where, and to whom certain utterances are appropriate, neglects cultural factors, fails to address how cultural norms and practices influence language use and interpretation, overlooks pragmatic knowledge, doesn't include understanding of how to achieve communicative goals through language. These limitations led Del Hymes and others to develop broader theories of language competence that could account for the social and interactive dimensions of language use, particularly for second language teaching purposes. Del Hymes' communicative competence. Beyond grammar, Hymes argued that speakers need more than grammatical knowledge. They must know when, where, and how to use language appropriately. Social dimension includes ability to use language in social interactions, recognizes that communication occurs in social contexts. Language in use focuses on real language in real situations, addresses how people actually communicate, not just ideal forms. Hymes wanted to design a theory that could deal with real language in real use. His theory of communicative competence includes interactional components that were missing from Chomsky's model, making it more applicable to language teaching and learning, especially for second language acquisition. Judgment in communication. For judgment in Hymes' communicative competence. Systematic potential. Whether something is formally possible in a language system, similar to Chomsky's linguistic competence. Knowledge of grammar rules and vocabulary. Appropriacy. Whether something is appropriate in relation to context. Knowledge of social and cultural norms. Understanding of register and style. Occurrence. Whether something is actually performed in the language. Knowledge of frequency and probability. Understanding what is natural versus technically possible. Feasibility. Whether something is possible in terms of human processing. Knowledge of cognitive and social psychological constraints. Understanding memory limitations and processing capacity. Elements of appropriacy in communication. Appropriacy involves numerous variables and variables that influence how we communicate. This includes participants, who is involved, social relationships, status differences, setting, location and time, scene, psychological environment, form, linguistic features, topic, subject matter, purpose, intention, key, tone, genre, type of communication, channel, medium, code, language variety, interaction norms, behavior rules, and interpretation norms, how messages are understood. Yalden's appropriacy variables. 1. Participants. 2. Social relationships. 3. Settings. 4. Scene. 5. Form, topic, purpose. 6. Key, genre, channel, code. 7. Interaction and interpretation norms. Participants. Who is taking part in the communicative situation? 2. Social relationships. What is the relative status of the participants? 3. Setting. Where and when is the communication taking place? 4. Scene. What is the psychological and cultural environment? 5. Form, topic, purpose. What linguistic features are used? What is being discussed and why? 6. Key, gender, channel, and code. What is the tone, type, medium, and language variety? 7. Interaction and interpretation norms. What rules govern behavior and understanding? Hymes' view of language modes and language models. Such a model implies naming to be the sole use of speech, as if languages were never organized to lament, rejoice, beseech, admonish, aphorize, inveigh, for the many varied forms of persuasion, direction, expression, and symbolic play. A model of language must design it with a face toward communicative conduct and social life. Hymes rejected models that define language organization as simply linking meaning and form. He emphasized that language serves many purposes beyond naming things. It expresses emotions, directs behavior, maintains relationships, and enables creative expression. This perspective expanded the notion of competence beyond grammaticality to include the social and functional dimensions of language use. Evolution of communicative competence. 1. Chomsky, 1960, introduced distinction between competence, knowledge, and performance, use, focused primarily on grammatical knowledge. Himes, 1970s, expanded to communicative competence, including social dimensions, added appropriacy, occurrence, and feasibility to grammaticality. Canal and Swain, 1980, developed three-component model: grammatical, social-linguistic, strategic, applying specifically to language teaching. Canal, 1983, added discourse competence as fourth component, distinguished between knowledge and actual communication. Savignon, 1983, proposed interrelationship model of components, emphasized strategic competence from beginning stages. Canal and Swain's initial model, 1980, strategic competence, verbal and non-verbal communication strategies. Social-linguistic competence, appropriateness of meaning and form. Grammatical competence, mastery of the linguistic code. Canal and Swain's 1980 model was based on a comprehensive review of previous studies. It included three main components that work together to enable effective communication. Grammatical competence, similar to Chomsky's linguistic competence, forms the foundation, while social-linguistic competence addresses appropriateness, and strategic competence helps overcome communication breakdowns. Canal's view of linguistic communication. Social interaction. Language is acquired and used in social contexts. Unpredictability. Communication involves high degrees of unpredictability and creativity. Contextual constraints. Discourse and social cultural contexts provide constraints and clues. Psychological limitations. Communication occurs under limiting conditions like memory constraints. Purposeful. Communication always has a purpose or goal. Authentic. Real communication involves authentic language. Outcome-based. Success is judged based on actual outcomes. Canal's expanded model, 1983. Grammatical competence, mastery of the linguistic code, verbal and non-verbal. Includes vocabulary, word formation, sentence formation, pronunciation, spelling, and linguistic semantics. Social linguistic competence, appropriateness of utterances with respect to meaning and form, understanding of social context, role relationships, shared information, and communicative purpose. Discourse competence, ability to combine grammatical forms and meanings to achieve unified spoken or written text. Includes cohesion in form and coherence in meaning. Strategic competence, verbal and non-verbal communication strategies to compensate for breakdowns and enhance effectiveness. Includes paraphrasing, repetition, hesitation, avoidance, guessing, and shift in register and style. Knowledge versus actual communication. Underlying knowledge. The system of knowledge that enable communication includes all four competence components. Relatively stable cognitive structures. What a person knows about language and communication. The potential for communication. Actual communication. The realization of knowledge under limiting conditions affected by fatigue, nervousness, distractions, dynamic and context dependent. What a person actually does with language. The performance of communication. Canal maintain a distinction similar to Chomsky's competence-performance dichotomy, but with a broader view of what constitutes competence. This distinction acknowledges that what people know about communication may differ from how they actually communicate in specific situations. Savignon's interactional model. Savigny was the first to propose a specific relationship between the four components of communicative competence. In her model, the components interact continuously rather than functioning as separate modules. She suggests that social-linguistic and strategic competence may enable basic communication even before grammatical competence develops. This insight is particularly relevant for beginning language learners who can often communicate basic needs despite limited grammar knowledge. Strategic competence is present from the beginning of language learning, but diminishes in importance as the other components develop. Strategic competence, the survival component. Paraphrasing, rewarding when you don't know the exact term, the thing you use to eat soup instead of spoon. Gestures, using non-verbal communication to convey meaning. Pointing, miming actions, facial expressions. Clarification request, asking for repetition or explanation. Could you say that again? Or what does it mean? Topic avoidance, changing subjects when vocabulary is lacking. Steering conversation to familiar territory. Strategic competence is particularly important for beginning language learners. It allows them to communicate despite limited grammatical, social-linguistic, and discourse incompetence. As learners become more proficient, they rely less on compensatory strategies and more on their growing knowledge of the language system. 5 sub-competencies in Spanish educational system. Grammatical competence, using linguistic units according to system rules. Discourse competence, using different discourse types appropriate to situation. Social linguistic competence, adapting utterances to specific contexts. Strategic competence, adjusting communication during interactions. Social cultural competence, awareness of social and cultural context. The Spanish education system adapted the theoretical models of communicative competence into 5 sub-competencies for practical teaching purposes. This framework guides curriculum development and assessment across different educational stages nationwide. Grammatical competence in detail, phonology, sound system of the language, pronunciation, stress, intonation patterns, recognition and production of phonemes. Morphology, word formation rules and patterns, inflections, derivations, compound, understanding of word structure, syntax, rules for forming grammatical sentences, word order, sentence patterns, grammatical relationships between words. Lexis, vocabulary knowledge and usage, word meanings and collections, idiomatic expressions. Grammatical competence involves the ability to recognize and produce the distinctive grammatical structures of language and to use them effectively in communication. It forms the foundation for the other competencies, but it is not sufficient on its own for effective communication. Discourse competence in detail, cohesion, coherence, general knowledge, turn-taking. Discourse competence enables speakers to combine grammatical forms and meanings to create unified spoken or written text in different genders. It involves understanding how ideas connect across sentences and paragraphs to form a coherent whole. Cohesion. Grammatical links between parts of a text includes pronouns, conjunctions, ellipses. Coherence. Logical connection of ideas and arguments creates meaningful and unified messages. General knowledge, understanding different text types, recognizing appropriate formats. Turn-taking, managing conversation flow, knowing when to speak or listen. Social linguistic competence in detail, register variation, adjusting language formally based in situation. Adjusting language formality based on situation, knowing when to use formal versus casual language, social norms, understanding politeness conventions, recognizing appropriate forms of address, speech acts, performing functions like requesting, apologizing, using culturally appropriate expressions, dialect recognition, awareness of regional and social language varieties, understanding implications of dialect choices. Social linguistic competence involves knowing how to use language appropriately in different social contexts. It requires sensitivity to social rules, cultural references, and the relationship between speakers. This competence helps learners avoid awkward or offensive communication despite grammatical accuracy. Strategic competence in detail. Compensatory strategies. Circumlocution, describing when you don't know a word. Approximation, using similar words. Word coinage, creating new words. Code switching, using L1 words. Nonverbal communication, gestures, facial expressions. Interaction strategies, asking for clarification or repetition. Checking comprehension. Requesting slower speech. Repair strategies, self-correction. Maintaining conversation despite difficulties. Strategic competence involves verbal and non-verbal strategies that help compensate for breakdowns in communication and enhance the effectiveness of interaction. It is particularly important for language learners who may have gaps in their linguistic knowledge but need to communicate anyway. Social cultural competence in detail. Cultural practices, understanding everyday behaviors, customs, and rituals in the target culture. Knowing appropriate greetings, gestures, and social conventions. Cultural products, familiarity with literature, music, art, and other cultural creations. Recognition of important cultural symbols and references. Cultural perspectives, awareness of values, beliefs, and attitudes that underlie cultural practices. Understanding different worldviews and philosophical outlooks. Social cultural competence beyond language. Non-verbal communication, understanding culturally specific gestures and body language. Recognizing appropriate physical distance and eye contact. Social institutions, knowledge of education, family, political, and economic systems, understanding how institutions shape communication patterns. Cultural references, recognizing allusions to history, literature, and popular culture, understanding jokes, idioms, and metaphors with cultural content. Taboos and sensibilities and sensitivities, awareness of topics to avoid or approach carefully, understanding cultural values around privacy, religion, and politics. Social cultural competence goes beyond language itself to include awareness of the cultural context in which the language is used. It helps learners avoid cultural misunderstandings and communicate more effectively with native speakers by understanding the cultural framework that shapes communication. Implications for language teaching. Balanced approach. Integrate all 5 competencies rather than focusing exclusively on grammar. Recognize that communication requires multiple skill sets working together. Authentic material. Use real-world texts and situations that demonstrate natural language use. Expose learners to language as it is actually in the culture, in the target culture. Communicative activities. Design tasks that require meaningful exchange of information. Create opportunities for negotiation of meaning in realistic contexts. Cultural integration. Incorporate cultural knowledge throughout language instruction. Help learners understand the cultural context of language use. Assessment of communicative competence. Traditional assessment. Focus on grammatical accuracy, discrete point testing of isolated forms of skills, emphasis on written production, control predictable tasks, often decontextualize. Communicative assessment. Evaluation of overall communicative effectiveness, integrated skills assessment, balance of written and oral production, authentic and predictable tasks. Contextualize in realistic situations. Assessing communicative competence requires going beyond traditional grammar-focused texts to evaluate how well learners can actually use language to accomplish real-world tasks. This means creating assessment situations that mirror authentic communication challenges and evaluating performance across all competence areas. Challenges in developing communicative competence. Time constraints, limited classroom hours to develop multiple competencies. Cultural distance, difficulty assessing authentic cultural context. Large classes, limited opportunities for individual practice and feedback. Teacher preparation, need for teachers skilled in all competence areas. Material limitations, textbooks that emphasize grammar over other competencies. Assessment challenges, difficulty in reliably measures all competence components. Future directions in communicative competence. Digital competence, integration of technological literacy with language skills. Collaborative competence, skills for co-constructing meaning in group context. Intercultural competence, enhanced focus on navigating multiple cultural frameworks. Multimodal competence, communication across different semiotics system. The concept of communicative competence continues to evolve as communication itself changes. New technologies, globalization, and changing social practices are expanding what it means to be communicatively competent in the 21st century. Future models will likely incorporate additional dimensions that reflect these changes. Key takeaways. 1. Beyond grammar. Effective communication requires more than grammatical knowledge. 5. Competencies. Grammatical, discourse, social linguistic, strategic, social cultural. 4 dimensions. Systematic, potential, appropriacy, occurrence, feasibility. 3 theories. Chomsky, Himes, Canal, Swine, Savignon. Language is fundamentally a tool for communication, and teaching should reflect this purpose. The concept of communicative competence has transformed language education by expanding our understanding of what learners need to know and be able to do with language. By addressing all components of communicative competence, we can help learners become truly effective communicators. Bibliography. Thank you very much for your understanding. The primary sources include Collins English Dictionary, Glasgow, 2020. Crystal, 1987, The Cambridge Encyclopedia of Language, Cambridge University Press. Encyclopedia Britannica, Chicago, 1990. Halliday, 1976, Spoken and Written Language, Geelong, Deakin University Press. Halliday, 1978, Language as a Social Semiotic, London, Arnold. Halliday, 1982, Functional Grammar, London, Arnold. Halliday and Hazard, 1976, Cohesion in English, London. Thank you. Thank you very much for listening.